We see more and more banks transition to a variety of tokens, digital tokens. JP Morgan has already introduced it. They have the system in place. Right now, they're saying, oh, it's just for business customers. But in fact, as someone who's audited many banks and worked at a bank myself, the Fed Reserve has to be fully aligned with its member banks. So if those systems are already in place and have been implemented by Chase, by Citi is another one, that means that the Federal Reserve has that system in place as well. Because that's how the system works.
Hello, everybody. This is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today I got a fellow YouTuber with me, the one and only Lena Petrova. Based in the United States, Lena holds an MBA and is a certified public accountant. She spent close to a decade as a financial auditor, auditing some of the largest companies in the world, like Citi Bank, Nike, and BP. She is now focusing on management consulting and, of course, being also an educator who enjoys sharing her expertise. She runs her own YouTube channel where she talks about finance and geoeconomics. Check it out. It's linked in the description. Lena, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Pascal.
So, Lena, let's start maybe with a little bit of your work. When did you actually start your channel, and when did you become interested in the, geopolitics, geoeconomics, and thought that this deserves some analysis?
So I started my YouTube channel a couple of years ago, and it's interesting because it evolved over the years. And I went from solely focusing on business and finance to kind of transitioning into economics and geoeconomics and kind of covering the latest events. And I think what pushed me to do that is the volume of news and the events that are sort of coming at us every single day. The world is changing so fast. And as I was speaking to some of my coworkers and some of my friends and family, and just even reading the commentary, I realized that people are having a very difficult time keeping up with everything that's going on, and then understanding, who to believe and what the reality is and where the truth lies. So I think those were kind of the main reasons that I know spiked my interest in geoeconomics and geopolitics and covering the latest news. And I was very, very happy to see that so many people respond well, and so many people are truly looking for that information. They want to find a reliable source, and they want to learn more and to be able to set their expectations and know how to react to all of the events and everything that's going on in the world right now.
Yeah, and your expertise is also quite interesting because you come from a business background, right, in terms of what you studied, and you're a certified public accountant. So you kind of have insights into some of the mechanics of working with money, and not just with like the talking about it. How did this background help you how does it help you to do your analysis?
Well, it helps me understand, I think, kind of the underlying processes that are going on, right? Because as someone who doesn't know, for example, anything about finance or financial reporting or taxes, it's extremely difficult to understand, what does the IRS try to do? What's the latest tax law, and how does it impact me? So I think having that background allowed me to not just have a better understanding, but also to be able to explain it in a very simple manner to people who are willing to watch the videos.
And we will talk about this in the second part of the video, but it also it enables you to kind of infer or to see when there's a big problem, like when a Pentagon doesn't pass an audit, which is going to be the second part, but also what it means for, let's say, whole economies. Like if you look at the way that the world is working at the moment, or how geopolitics is developing, what are the most important issues or pieces that are moving at the moment? like let's say the de-dollarization or the petrodollar that's going down? Like what's the biggest kind of thing that's going to impact geoeconomics?
I would say that definitely the transition to a variety of safe haven assets. So, de-dollarization is one aspect, but there are so many reasons behind it. And one of my goals has been to explain and to provide, timely information to people to help them truly realize that it is not just a one event. It's not just one person who decided to move away from the dollar. It's a number of countries, and I've reported multiple times on the BRICS bloc and the possible consequences of their economic unity and alliance on the dollar and the reserve currency, which is the United States dollar right now. So I think those are the things to look out for. I would say that, natural resources are going to be another interesting area that I want to dive into moving forward, because I think we've already started to see countries accumulate or starting to gain access to natural resources at an efficient cost. So, for example, oil, right? So we know that the BRICS is really targeting those oil reserves, and they will control 40%, actually 41+% of crude oil reserves in the world as of January the 1st. And so we see that transition where there are some major changes and major shifts going on, not just in geopolitics, but also in the financial world. And another important, very important topic for me personally is, of course, digital currencies. And we see more and more banks transition to a variety of tokens, digital tokens. JP Morgan has already introduced it. They have the system in place. Right now, they're saying, oh, it's just for business customers. But in fact, as someone who's audited many banks and worked at a bank myself, the Fed Reserve has to be fully aligned with its member banks. So if those systems are already in place and have been implemented by Chase, by Citi is another one, that means that the Federal Reserve has that system in place as well, because that's how the system works. So I think those are the big changes coming probably in the short term.
But can you explain this to me? Because it doesn't entirely make sense. So people talk a lot about, well, digital currency and having a digital dollar and so on and so forth. But most of the money, the vast majority, is already digital anyhow. I mean, all of the assets that are on people's accounts, right? That's not physical cash that there's somewhere in a vault. Those are numbers in a spreadsheet, and most of the transactions are done electronically. So that's already digital money. And that money is, by the way, really, really old. We've had that 80 years ago. There were settlements in the Second World War that were done completely digitally via telegraph. What's the difference between this kind of deposits and the digital cash we're talking about, these tokens?
Right. So, for example, if you have a deposit right now, that is your money. It's an asset. It's your asset, and it's a liability on the bank's books, right? So because they owe you that money essentially. But the implication is that you are in control of your own deposits, right? So you can take it out whenever you wish. You can transfer it to whoever you wish, just generally speaking, right? But when it comes to digital currencies, and especially central bank digital currencies, those are going to be fully controlled by the entity that issues them. And the entity that issues them is going to be a central bank of every single country. So with that, it's essentially kind of like a program, right? And the settings are going to be determined by the issuer. So for instance, if a person, let's say, maybe going forward, we won't even have to pay taxes when we submit our tax return to the IRS. Those taxes may be taken out of our accounts by the IRS automatically, right? So that is one of the things where the issue, the issue lies. Who is in control of your money? And there's a good argument that it's the issuer, because the issuer will determine what the what the settings are, what they choose to turn on. Is it going to be you can only use your cash within 20 miles of your home? Is it going to be you're limited to an X amount of withdrawals per month? We don't know. I think we've already had several instances of central bank digital currencies around the world. One of them is Nigeria, and then China is another example. So I think the main differences would be the who owns it, right? Who is in reality in control of that money, and how limited would we as depositors, let's just say, at a bank would be in terms of our access to our own cash, right? So I think that's the biggest issues, and of course there's a lot to be said about digital currencies in the context of WEF agenda and other things such as digital IDs and so on and so forth.
That's interesting, because so what you're saying is that this would be it would be a big switch in the way that banking happens until now, not so much because of the technology used, but because of the rules. Because, you and I, we cannot hold deposits at the central bank. We are excluded from that. Only banks can hold deposits. The only assets that we can hold from the central bank is actually the physical cash, right? The printed bills. Those are our assets and central bank liability. And you're saying that so the switch will be having basically a digital having deposits directly from the central bank, but probably mediated through a commercial bank, but directly from the central bank. Would that be the big change?
I believe that's the goal. That's kind of the high level overview of that structure. I think the deposits would be held with the central bank from what I've read and from what I've researched. And of course, there would be banks that would be a kind of an intermediary between the public and the institution itself, right? So but I think because the central bank digital currency is issued by a central bank, the central bank would effectively exercise full control of the digital currency.
But shouldn't retail banks freak out about this? Because this basically makes them redundant. I mean,
right.
You don't need them anymore in order to do that. And, I remember a talk very clearly about 3 years ago in Tokyo when one of the directors of the Swiss National Bank, she explicitly said, we don't want to do digital currencies because that is not our business. We are not in the business of making digital assets for private entities, for private customers. That's what the retail banks do.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the underlying issues with that would be the fact that not every single bank has the infrastructure in place to become an intermediary, so to speak, right? So not for example, smaller banks, community banks, they just will not be able to survive because they may not have the infrastructure that would be able to service that type of a system, right? So I would think that there is a strong opposition, whether or not it is made known, and whether or not it is something that mass media is reporting on is another question. I certainly don't see a whole lot of opposition here in the United States, but with that, we've also had several bills that were introduced. They haven't really made it far, but they were introduced to ban CBDC in the United States. They haven't really passed the House, I believe. The last time I checked was a little over a month ago. But there's definitely a movement to ban it in the United States. But I think it's fair to be skeptical because you see the whole world moving in that direction.
Do you also look at what the Bank for International Settlement in Basel does? Because that's the central bank of central banks. And do you know anything about their policy on digital currencies?
Right. So I believe, so it is the central bank of central banks, and they effectively, they've existed since the 1930s. I believe they were originally founded in the 1930s, and not many people hear about it because it's not something that, you really think about, especially here in the United States. We hear about the Fed, and we never hear about the Bank of International Settlements. But based on their documentation, and I actually have a brief article on Substack about this. So they are, in fact, planning on tokenizing assets, all customer assets. And they've written at length about this in one of their papers. It's published on the website, so it is available to anyone who's willing to do the research and do the homework. But effectively, they speak about tokenizing every single asset that a person can hold. It doesn't appear to be just the bank deposits, but also if you own, for example, equities, right? So you invest in a company and you own stocks or options or any other investment vehicles, those would be tokenized too. And that's one of the things that surprised me when I was doing my research about the Bank of International Settlements. It really surprised me that despite the fact that we don't hear a lot about it, despite the fact that somehow it doesn't make the news, right? And it should, because this would affect every single person. But that game plan is already in place. It seems to be that there is a framework and it's available for the public to review, even though not many people are interested, right? So
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be too much afraid of that, especially because of this. This all happens out in the open, and this is a long process. Banking is really, really interesting because it is a very political act, because you need to get a lot of people together. In the Bank for International Settlement, you have Bank for International Settlement itself is one of the most incredible institutions in the world, because it resides in Switzerland, but it's basically sovereign. And the only one who controls it is the directors of the member central banks, not even the countries. This thing is so well insulated legally that you would literally probably have to bomb it to get, even that couldn't get rid of it. It's very, very well structured. And in this sense, it just works with the consent of all the member banks. And it's really a fascinating institution. And I don't think it's nefarious. It's more like it's an interesting part of the system.
it really is. And when I started learning about it, I was truly surprised by how little we know about it. And one of the things that surprised me the most was the voting structure, right? So different countries, different member countries have percentage of votes that can be assigned to them. So effectively, the Western countries have a more significant influence on the decisions made by the Bank of International Settlements than, for example, Middle Eastern or Eastern European countries. So the structure itself is truly interesting, and I'm glad that you brought it up, because I think this is something that more and more people need to become aware of, because it does affect indirectly, it does affect our banking system, and it affects the decisions that our central banks make.